Howdy, folks. Welcome to the podcast Iron. My name is Laura Mullen Vermilia, and on this podcast, I interview members of the cast iron art community in order to inspire, educate, and spread ideas about iron casting and cast iron art. Our guest on today's episode is Ashely Hope Carlisle. Ashely is a professor of art in sculpture at the University of Wyoming, and she produces innovative and stimulating works of art using a variety of materials that include fabricated steel, cast and formed paper, as well as cast iron. Ashely, thank you so much for this chat. Getting to hear your backstory and learning how you have navigated life to accomplish your goals was an amazing gift. I was so excited to interview you because I find you extremely interesting as a person, but also since you earned your MFA degree from the University of Georgia 6 or 7 years before I was there, I was hoping to learn more about the history of UGA iron casting, as well as maybe hear some new stories. And boy, did you deliver on that. So thank you. The Podcast Iron Show is sponsored in part by supporters on Patreon. So thank you to everyone who has joined as a Patreon member to help me afford the production costs of this show. And I'm so honored to say that this episode is brought to you by our top supporter, Sloss Metal Arts, which is a national center for iron casting and metal art. For more information about Sloss Metal Arts program, visit their website, which is slossmetalarts.com. And if you're excited to attend the next National Conference on Contemporary Cast Iron Art and Practices, which is hosted in Birmingham, Alabama by the Sloss Metal Arts program, the dates are April 5th through the 8th in 2023, which is about 9 months away. So there's plenty of time to ask off from work, save for the gas money, and start making the artwork that you're going to enter into the exhibition. Now, for all of you listening or watching, thanks so much for tuning in, and please enjoy. Ashely Hope Carlisle, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I've been looking forward to this for a really long time. For since you signed up, I was just
Since you signed up.
Yeah. So let's just start off where we usually do with, well, Ashely, who the hell are you anyways?
My name is Ashely Hope Carlisle, like you said, and I'm a visual artist as well as a professor of sculpture here at the University of Wyoming in Laramie, Wyoming. I've been here about going on 19 years. I say visual artist versus sculptor because I do a little bit of everything 2D and 3D. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it depends on what the idea is for the piece, and then that then dictates the material.
Awesome. So what I want to know, because I know a little bit about you, but I really don't. So I'm really interested to know about kind of your upbringing. And as you were a child and growing up, did you have any early introductions to art or early introductions to using tools or working with your hands?
Yeah, so pretty traditional middle class family. I'm one of 2 girls. I'm the youngest. I'm the baby. And my mother was kind of typical housewife, but she painted. So she did oil painting as well as watercolor and drawing. My father was an accountant for an oil company, and I was born in New Orleans, born and raised in New Orleans, but most of my family's from Mississippi. So I am a Southern girl for sure, just transplanted to the West. And so much like Margie talked about, my family weren't huge, like fix it. You know, if something was broken, they pretty much call someone to come fix it. And so tools were not necessarily part of my childhood. I worked in the garden a lot with my mother. I painted and drew. Like if we were bored, she didn't put us in front of the television. She gave us paints and pencils and whatnot, and we did art. I was also a dancer. I did ballet as well as that for a while. And so that was really, I think, my introduction to art was through my mother, for sure. And so there was an artist in New Orleans named June Lampy, and she would do Saturday classes for kids, and then she would do adult classes during the week. So my mom would take from Miss Lampy, and then we were able to take from her on Saturdays. You'd spend a couple hours doing like traditional kind of oil painting. so underpainting all of that. And so I learned pretty young how to draw and paint, enough that I got really sick of it by the
Oh,
time I kind of went up. Although I did take art classes when I was in school, because I just loved it. But in eighth grade, I remember I went to a magnet school, which started at seventh grade. So you had to take a test to get into it in New Orleans. And I took an art class in eighth grade, and the teacher hated everything I did. I mean, it was like I could do no right. And so I thought maybe I'm not good at this, and I shouldn't be thinking about it in any way in terms of a career. And then my parents got divorced, and my mother got remarried, and we ended up moving to Fairhope, Alabama, my junior year of high school, which is pretty intense,
yeah, I
right?
was gonna
That face
say.
is right. Yeah, it was really intense. And Fairhope is a beautiful town in Alabama, but it's very small. And the people at the high school, they had known each other since they were in kindergarten. Here I come, this random person from New Orleans. So I think they didn't really, it was very cliquey. I don't think they knew exactly what group to put me in, because at McMain, the magnet school I went to, everyone just hung out with everyone. It didn't matter about race or gender, whatever. You just, everyone was there. And it was a college preparatory school, so everybody was really smart. But it was also a creative school. And so when I got to Fairhope, no one spoke to me for 6 months. I was just kind of by myself. And I took an art class, thinking, okay, it's comfort in this crazy move.
Yeah.
And the art teacher took me in at lunch, so I wasn't pathetic and sitting there by myself. And I just formed a really strong bond and relationship with Miss O'Connor Page, and then connected with the other art teacher, Miss Lee. And so much to the point where I ended up taking AP classes in art while I was there, and that was kind of what I was known for as a high school student my last 2 years. And really kind of put back in my mind that maybe there's something there that I could do with art as a career. And so that was encouraging and kind of gave me my confidence back in what I was making. And of course made my mother just thrilled, and my father a little nervous, I think. Like, what are you going to do with art? But it was from Miss Lee and Miss OP that I learned about the College of Art Institute of Chicago.
Oh,
And,
okay.
and so I applied there, and I got in for undergrad. But I couldn't afford it. At the time, it was $20,000 a year. So there was no way I could pay for that. And by the time we kind of figured that out, all of the deadlines for colleges were gone. So my mother basically drug me, kicking and screaming, to University of Southern Miss in Hattiesburg, Mississippi,
Okay.
because the last place I wanted to stay was in the South. I wanted to get out, to stretch my wings, to go somewhere in
Yeah.
Chicago. It seemed like, I mean, my mother basically, framed that acceptance letter. She was so excited for me because she never got to go to school for art.
Hmm.
So when I didn't get to go, it was like, Mississippi, really? But she had heard there was a really great art program there. Um, and I was able to get work study and scholarships and all of that based off of the work that I had done in high school. And so I went in majoring in graphic design. I was a graphic design major because I thought, well, my father's a businessman, so I'll make him happy doing graphic design, and my mother's an artist, so I'll make her happy still being creative. So, I went in with that. And this was back when, like, we had computers, but they were nothing like we have now, right? So everything was going to be hand drawn, and I liked that part. I think I always liked drafting, and drawing, and I've always been told I have like a kindergarten teacher handwriting. So, like, just clean and clear.
Yeah.
I think it was important as a graphic designer at that point. But I had to take foundations classes, right? And
Yeah.
so I was in a 3D design class with Harold Van Houten, or Skip. right? As everyone knows him. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Who, if you've never met Skip, haven't heard stories about him, is just the funniest, kind of goofiest, smartest, most amazing individual I think I had ever met at that time, especially. But kind of like, what does he want us to do while you're in the class? But and there were only, this at the time, USM sculpture area was nothing as it is now. It was in the bottom of the old industrial design building, in the middle of campus, and every time it rained, it flooded in that space. And there was basically a wood shop and then kind of a steel fab shop with a bronze furnace. But it was a hot mess. There was just like tools and stuff everywhere. And then there was a classroom, and then there was Skip's office, which was like, I'm not kidding you, Laura, it was like paperwork, like that was just, so he never was really in there, which is not surprising. He was a maker. But there were only, I think, 2 or 3 of us females that were taking sculpture interested. And even in the 3D class at that time, it was primarily male students. And there was an opportunity for us to go to, for those of us that were interested, for us to go to the second international conference at Sloss. So, yeah. And it was, this was 94, right? So, because I graduated high school in 93. And so I was like, sure, I'll go. And so we all carpooled. There were probably about 6 or 7 of us students.
Had you seen an iron pour yet or heard what? So you're in foundations.
I'm in foundations, and I really hadn't. If I had, maybe I saw it, but I wasn't a part of it.
Okay.
But I don't think I had. I don't think I even knew what the hell an iron pour was at this point. I just knew that we were gonna work while we were there. We were gonna chop up something called Coke. We were gonna carpool. There were probably about 6 or 7 of us students, all different levels of sculpture students that were gonna go. And we had this opportunity, and it wasn't going to be very expensive. So it was like, okay,
sign me up.
Yeah. Let's go to Birmingham. So we drove up, and it was probably me and one other female student that went, Karen Lansing, and Dan Timms and Joe McCrary, just names that I'm sure you've all heard. And we got there, and Sloss looked nothing like it does now. There was nothing there, basically. They had, they were kind of like just opening up to conferences, but there were no sheds like within the number one casting shed. Like there were no like now I feel like there's a place you can do patinas, and there's this and this shed. No, none of that existed at this point. So we were there, I think like 5 or 6 days, and we hit Coke to make charges for 2 or 3 days. Wow. We're just black. I remember taking showers, and like it took me 2 or 3 showers to get it all off. Yeah. And George Beasley was there, and he was creating one of his kind of built furnaces in the spray pond. And there were people showing up with all these furnaces, and it was like a carnival, right? So with everybody really dirty. so we all like bunked it, there's like 6 people to a hotel room, and you get to meet all these different people. And it's where I met Barry Bailey. I met George, and I think at that time I felt like I'm just kind of a fly on the wall, because I just watched a lot. I watched the camaraderie between Skip and George, the many people that would come and hug each other in all these leathers and, safety gear. And our safety gear back then was like pathetic. It was sad and kind of scary, and probably could have gotten us really hurt. It just was pretty minimal, not like shorts and flip-flops, but it just safety wasn't a huge thing. And I remember, I remember talking to you or listening to you talk about grinders and the guards not being on them. Yeah. I mean, like our tools were kind of pathetic, and you bought your own grinder, but otherwise it was pretty simple. But it made such an impact, just the work ethic. Like, I mean, my mother always instilled in us, I think, this work ethic, and roll up your sleeves and don't be afraid to get dirty, and that's called artwork, right?
Nice. Yeah.
So, so I think I've never been afraid of hard work,
Mhm.
but it was intimidating too, and especially because at the time, I think my job was to fetch Skip beer while he was pouring. I think that was my gig was to like run, right? If you need
Yeah.
another. He was really nervous about his furnace, but he was more nervous about his mold pouring
Hmm.
fully. And we were casting about 1,500 pounds in his mold
Okay.
at one time. And so I was leathered up, but I really wasn't doing anything except just being there. If somebody needed something, I could grab a shovel or whatever.
Uh-huh.
But I really didn't know the lay of the land. So it kind of kept me safe over there. But I watched him pour 1,500 pounds of molten metal and all these people working together to get it done. And these, senior students, Brian Nettles as well, all working with him to get that mold poured. And I came back and I changed my major. I just, this is what I want to do, right? I don't know how you make a living at it. I don't know where the money comes from. But I just loved everything about it. And it wasn't painting and drawing, which I felt like at that point, naively that I already knew everything about that, and I didn't want to sit and tickle on a canvas. And
Hmm.
I mean, no disrespect to painters, because now I paint and draw all the time, but it
Yeah.
just the physicality of it all was really what I was interested in and what I fell in love with, as well as the people and the smells and how dirty you got, and it was completely fine, and the trains rolling by. I mean, just everything about it
Yeah.
was magical. And I know I got goosebumps just thinking about it.
I know you just reminded me of the trains. Like I have so many memories of the years, just year after year after year. Cause I usually camp
Yeah,
and
yeah,
wake up at who knows what. God knows what time I went to bed at. God knows
yeah,
what time it is. But then the train's coming through
yeah,
and it would wake me up, but then it kind of puts you back to sleep. And I just had a very real, like, I forgot about the trains,
yeah.
but they're
The
always
history
there.
yeah, the history of the place, the plaques everywhere, the
Yeah.
bolts with the Nazi symbols on them. I mean, just everything about that experience was altering for me. So I came back, I changed my major, and my graphic design teacher was furious. He was so pissed and just like, never going to make any money, and why are you wasting your talent, and la 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 la. And
Jeez.
I just was like, well, but this is what I want to do.
Mhm.
So, you
Can
know,
I ask you a little bit about that first the invitational, like when you actually saw the molten iron for the first time or it being poured, like
the international, right? This
oh,
was
it
the
was the
second international
international.
that was
Okay.
at Sloss. Yeah.
So do
Yeah.
you remember like the first time because the first time I saw molten iron, it was very like it was like nothing I'd ever seen before in my life. And I'd done small casting,
Yeah.
but I'd never seen anything. So do you remember anything about
I mean,
seeing the iron?
we had done some aluminum casting, I think, at first, but I mean, it just made my heart race, right? When I just, and especially with his furnace and how much he was tapping out. And I think at the time, if I remember right, they had a really large ladle and everybody was tapping into that ladle just so that he could get enough metal to actually pour his mold. Um, yeah, it was invigorating. It was scary and beautiful, and every just I can literally like almost taste the smells that come along with an iron pour. My students know that every time we get ready for one, I'm like, it smells like an iron pour, because there's just all those mixes of the molds and the coke and everything. It's just nostalgic
Yeah.
for me.
It's like
It
the
really,
leathers
yeah.
too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And it just becomes, I think, part of your soul, part of your blood. It just
Yeah.
like you make a connection to it like none other. Fire, right? And it's
Yeah.
just draws you in, and it's I have to constantly kind of move my student, like, make sure that you're going to be drawn to this like a moth to a flame, but don't make this leather wall so that people can't see what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
But you can't help yourself. You
Yeah.
just find yourself kind of glazed over and staring at it.
Yeah.
So So
Okay.
yeah, so we had a little like 100 pounder that we used all the time, and we poured several times a year with Skip. I was the one always stoking the furnace, right? I was the one that wanted to put everything in. And I think I loved that part of it just for the sake of what it was, that I was feeding the fire. But I think also it was part of, I can pick this weight up and put it in here, no problem. I can be like the boys, because that meant respect that
Hmm.
came with that, right?
Yeah.
Because it was tricky. If you were female, you couldn't go out to Skip's house and be an apprentice with him like the male students could. You couldn't, and he had a huge furnace at his house.
Hmm.
And so if he had, if he ran that furnace at his house, like if and you were female, like you couldn't go anywhere near it. He just wouldn't let you.
Hmm.
And so there were things that I feel like there were parts of my education there at USM that would probably sound very different than, say, one of my male student colleagues,
Hmm.
because it was very different. For Joe McCreary got to learn a lot more from Skip, who I learned really a lot from was our shop tech at the time. His name was Tommy Connor, and
Hmm.
I had work study to pay for school, and so my work study was to work for him. And most of our tools were hand-me-downs from the industrial design program, so it was like 1950s everything, and if something broke, you basically had to make the part to fix it.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot, and he was an old school potter. He made all the tools, and Skip did too. If he had a piece he was making, he actually made the tool to make the piece. So there was, like, for instance, a wood lathe that he retrofitted to actually fit a giant piece of concrete that he then turned
Oh,
to make
wow.
it. Yeah, so there was a lot of that kind of stuff, but I could never get into the, like, how did you do that, and what did our ceramic shell mixer, which didn't really happen until my last year there,
Hmm.
um, was a trash can that was then hooked up to a drill press and had
Oh,
a timer set to it, and that it worked.
yeah.
But so I got to see, like, the after product, but I really wasn't allowed to basically, I connected a lot with what Margie Levine was talking about. It just, if you were a female, then you were kind of kept over here to do certain things. And so I was a BFA major, had a committee, and at USM, it was a 3D design degree. So you did just as much ceramics as you did sculpture. So I had a good background in clay as well as metal, some wood and some metal fabrication, like welding, that Tommy had taught me, pretty much. And so there was nothing off limits with Tommy. He taught me whatever I wanted to know, basically, and so that was lovely. And I got really close with his family in that connection. And so I was gonna graduate, and I hadn't, like, what do I do now? And at the time, no one was telling you these are the grad schools, and you could go and do this, you could go and do this. There was no, like, exiting strategies for once you graduated, your options.
Hmm.
And so I knew where Skip went to grad school, and I knew where he went to Alfred and then Penn State. And so I applied to those schools, and of course I didn't get in because my portfolio was pathetic. It was very formally, like, strong,
Hmm.
but no concept in it whatsoever, basically. And so, you didn't talk about your work a whole lot when I was in undergrad. It was more the formal aspects of it, like if it was welded well, this casting, if it had a short pour or whatever, you would talk about those things, but I don't remember a whole lot of conceptual aspects that we really delved into. And so I didn't get in, and then it was like, okay, well, I'm just gonna work and figure out what I'm gonna do. And so my mom was still in Fairhope, Alabama, and at the time I was with a man that I then ended up kind of living with in Alabama. And so during that time, I was just hell bent. I'm not going to work at a grocery store. I'm not going to be a waitress. I want to do something that will continue to add to my art making tools,
Yeah.
basically. And so I worked at a pottery for a year, Tom Jones Pottery. I threw 100 pots a day
Wow.
with cat and a dog sitting next to me. And it was me and Tom Jones, whom I just love more than life itself. And then his mother ran the store, and we all took turns making lunch, and it was very much like a family endeavor. So I did that for a year. And then I worked with a woodworker and his wife, and it was called McAdams Design, and it was Joyce and David McAdams, and they worked out of their house. He had a wood shop in the backyard, and then she made these beautiful like collages with Japanese papers and painted on them and whatnot. And they did like back when there's CDs, right?
Yeah.
They made these like cabinets for the CDs.
Mhm.
And so she would do the panel. So I learned all aspects of like a small business from them.
Wow. Yeah.
Enough, and they would go to craft store or craft conferences and craft shows, and they would get all their orders. They'd come back, and then we would make the orders for the year and ship them out. So I learned all about that enough that I was like, I don't want to do this for a living. This is not my bag. So
That's a useful lesson too.
it is. It is. But I had all of these slides of my work from USM, right? And so I just thought I want to go back to school. I've always loved school, and I haven't learned as much as I want to learn, and so that's why I really started applying to grad school again.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to learn more, and from other people, and so I think I just did some research and found out that the University of Georgia had, if I wanted to teach down the road, that I could have that possibility. They had a really amazing placement rate of putting grads in teaching positions. Mm-hmm. But really that was kind of over here. I wanted to learn more and build on what I felt like at the time was very little. And so I think I got in because of Jimbo Bonacorsi. I think he knew.
Because of your iron portfolio?
I think because I came from Southern Miss, he knew Skip. Mm-hmm. And I did have some iron in all of the pieces. I had some drawings in there too of my portfolio of 20. But I think in my mind, I think he saw, well, she's coming from Skip. She knows how to pour iron. She's not lazy. Right. I mean, that just comes with the territory, and there's potential. So, so I really owe my placement there to Jimbo. I really do. And so I got there, and I knew, and actually before I got there, I knew I was coming, and I was so excited. And I actually had broken up with my guy because he didn't want me to go to grad school, and it just didn't work out. And so I was like, I'm going to Athens, Georgia. I'm so excited. And there was a conference, I don't remember which one it was, but it was a conference right before I was going to get there. And I wanted to go and meet people from Georgia. I wanted to introduce myself and see what I'd be working with. And so at the time, grad students included Elizabeth Cronfield. Everybody knows her as Biz, right? John Boy Rollerson, who's at Florida State, and was huge into casting at the time, and some other, Rusty Wallace, who actually came from Jack Braun, so that's how I met Jack, was through Rusty, and so I introduced myself, and that's how I met David Jones, my now husband, right? So, and Skip was there at that conference, and so it was great to kind of hang out with him and see him. But yeah, I introduced myself, and then I was excited. I was on my way to Athens, Georgia, and they had 6 sculpture professors at the time. I mean, it was insanely huge. It was way different than the one deep that I had come from USM. Mm-hmm. So that was really exciting. I was hoping to still do some ceramics, to still get into the 2D world, maybe take some printmaking, which I had never taken, and other things, but. I got there, and the ceramics professor at the time didn't want me to take any classes. I think ceramics and sculpture at the time, they were fighting for the same money and whatnot, and he was like, no, you should just stay over there. And I was like, I'm taking your class. I'm taking your class. So it made my life a living hell that semester, but and it just kind of sealed the deal that, okay, ceramics is no longer necessarily a part of my world anymore. And honestly, the 100 pots a day at the pottery kind of burnt me out as well. I think it got rid of any kind of organic sensitivity to
Mm-hmm.
my work just because everything had to be so perfect.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, whatever, it's fine. And so I worked a lot with Jimbo, but my first month there, it was still summer. David had built a furnace and was running it, and his dad was there, and I was just this new, almost grad student. I wasn't even moved in yet.
Yeah.
And he was just kind of sitting in there, and his furnace failed. It didn't work. And I
Oh.
had never seen one not, and he hates when I tell this story, but I had never seen one not work. And what I figured out is that oftentimes you learn more from iron casting when something doesn't work than when it does,
Mm-hmm.
right? You figure out the whole lance aspect, what is not working, what, and problem solving, right? Which is what I love the most about sculpture, honestly. And I think it kind of makes us different than, say, painting, drawing, all those things, right? You
Yeah.
really have to problem solve, and I love a good puzzle. Always have, always have. So that was, we kind of like joked with him and made fun of him a little bit, but it really was a pretty amazing thing to see and to watch, and something that I wasn't accustomed to. I mean, all Skip's furnaces ran perfectly, and so that was really interesting. Also, how Jimbo ran his pours,
Mm-hmm.
and man, you really had to have some stamina because you're up all night working on stuff and getting everything ready, and then pouring all day. And I came in with an assistantship through the gallery,
Mm-hmm.
so part of that was I got to go to Cortona
Oh,
for free and work for the director at the time.
I forgot about Cortona. That's so
Uh,
funny. It was because when you're there at the University of Georgia, it is so big and in your face. And I never, unfortunately, got a chance to make it there, but it's, yeah, I forgot about that. It's amazing.
yeah, so
So you were there.
I was there. Well, before I got there that spring, there was a warehouse on the other side of town that we all had a show in. I mean, like the kind of space where you bring in clamp lights and,
Yeah.
I-
Yeah.
an ice storm had come through, and I was taking my work out, and of course I had these big heavy, steel and cast iron pieces, and one of them fell on me. I slipped and it fell on me, and I herniated the last two discs in my lower back.
Oh my gosh.
And I have never felt so much pain in my life, and it literally knocked me off my feet and took the breath out of me. And I did a lot of physical therapy. I swam every day. I went, like in Georgia, you get massages. You can get a prescription for massage, so I did that. And I rehabilitated as much as I could. But then when I went over to Cortona, I was helping with a show towards the end of our travels, because I was basically the assistant to the director of the Cortona program. So I got to go for free, learned Italian, all that stuff, but was basically at his beck and call. And we were getting ready for the students to have a show, and I was getting pedestals off of this like, crazy old like pillar, and just doing it in a really awkward way, and I ripped the discs in
Oh
my
my
back.
gosh.
So I was, almost crippled at that point, could barely walk, and it really affected like the end of my trip
Mm.
in Italy. And we ended up in, you'd go through Florence and Ravenna, and then we left out of Venice, and I could barely walk. So that took about 10 years to fully like recoup from it. But imagine, this is a 3-year grad program.
Yeah.
This is going into my second year.
Oh my
I could barely move, let alone cast iron or weld or, move around heavy things or any of that kind of stuff. And I had doctors telling me I needed to quit. I couldn't be a sculptor
God.
any longer. And then again, I think Jimbo came to my rescue, because there were professors that's like, she hasn't done enough, so she really should be kicked out. And he fought for me. No, she's had this injury, because of course Jimbo's had the same kind of
I was gonna
bodily
say, yeah,
issues. Yeah.
he probably
Um,
related a lot because
yeah.
I was by the time I was there, he had had the major neck surgery. And so I think that he was much more comfortable, but I've heard stories that there was years where he was in a lot of pain a lot of the time.
Yeah. You learn who your friends are, you learn who you are when you're in pain. It can really affect everything you do. But at the time, I had also the we were sculpture was right next to fiber arts, and so within our sculpture studio, you could hear like the weavers,
The
going.
looms?
Yeah, you could hear all that noise and them chattering about this and that, and so yeah, it was Ed Lambert was the professor there. He's passed, but he was there, and he just took to me and would bring me like fiber and things that were more like really tactile. And he was like, "Oh, you should be looking into this, and you should look at this artist." And when I got there, I was so unprepared at the contemporary artists that everyone else knew except me, that I lived in the library at UGA. I mean, I would basically sleep there. And especially Jimbo, man, he can name drop like nobody else I've
Oh
ever
yeah.
met.
His
And
art
that was
history chops is just out of this world.
it's amazing. And so I really had to catch up as much as I could, and I did. And that's where I learned about Ava Hess and yeah, so many amazing female artists that just fed me, and also artists that weren't just working in cast iron or heavy things, right? They were using fiber, they were using paper, all these other materials that I'm like, what? You can make sculpture out of that? Okay. And so when I hurt my back, folks would bring me materials to kind of play and keep me busy. And so I started almost building like these nest forms, which are really, they're meant for protection, but really it's kind of a false idea of protection. If you think about like a bird's nest, I mean, it can be destroyed within, minutes, but it's still there, and there's still this instinct to protect ourselves. And I think at that moment, I started making these like cage-like forms with these really fragile insides to them, because I just felt like I had no control over what had happened to me, and here I was, and I needed to figure out how to deal with it to continue on. And I was not going to stop making art. I was not going to stop being a sculptor. And so I think, my stubbornness worked for me in that way, and that I just persevered and pushed forward. Continuing to kind of rehabilitate, but also realizing like I might be kind of stuck with this situation for the rest of my life. David and I were just friends throughout this time. And then during my time at UGA, he then went to Sloss to be a resident artist there.
Okay.
And then I think he was done, and he came back, and all of a sudden I was just like, he's cuter than he normally was. and so and I think we always, liked each other and thought good things about each other. But I think after my breakup and whatnot before grad school, I was like, no, I'm not dating anybody. But he just came back, and he wasn't trying to impress me or anything. It was just like, okay, let's try this. And it's been like we've been together ever since. And so I finished Georgia, but before that, like, we had gone to the Christmas pours at George Beasley's, back and forth with Sloss. That's how I met Julie Ward, and all of those guys. And so when I finished in 2003, he got into grad school at the University of Tennessee, in Knoxville.
Okay.
Right. So then he was there a year when I was finishing up, so we were long distance, and then I moved to UT. And I adjunct taught while I was there. We actually lived in Jimbo and Leanne's. They had a storefront kind of apartment that they had they had rented, and we lived in that, and it was like the white ghetto. It was horrible. It was a corner store like that. That corner store was awesome. It was amazing. You had to walk through your studio to get to the restroom, which was beautiful. So I could go work in the studio in my pajamas. But you were on the corner of this horrible neighborhood, and we had deadbolts, and people would scream in the mail slot. And, I think my car got broken into the first time I went to visit him, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
where are we moving? Knoxville's changed a lot. It really has become a pretty amazing place. But at the time, it was like, where are we? But that was, everything's connected. So that was Jimbo and Leanne's place.
Yeah.
It was really cool to be there. And then I met Jennifer Odom and um, uh, so many folks there that that's where I met David Lobdell. So he came and did a workshop there, and I met David. And I adjunct for the Foundry class. So I did the Foundry class. I did 3D design. I did Sculpture 1 there. And so I was there a year when I applied for this job at the University of Wyoming. And I also met Remy in Knoxville,
Yeah.
right? Who's the craziest person I've ever loved. And uh, and so like during that time, kind of looking for jobs, I think the year before that, CAA, which is the College Art Association, right? They had a conference in Philadelphia, and that's where I met Jack Garon and
Okay.
Kurt Earhog and Butch Jack and all those guys, and became friends with them. And then the CAA conference for this job was in New York, so I actually went with Remy to New York City, and he was married at that time. And I got this job. I thought, well, this would be a good first job, right? 19 years later, here I am, right? But it was a pretty good first job. So I applied and I asked David, "Do you want to move to Wyoming?" And he's like, "Yeah, the hunting's great there. Let's go." So, here we are. But meanwhile, you're still going to conferences. And I think right before I interviewed for this job, and this was the interview on site, I was at a conference at Sloss. And I think Tanya Sinera was there, and she actually interviewed for this job too. So when she came back for her interview, I was leaving Sloss to go to my interview here. And I ended up getting it. Yeah. So that was crazy. I think they had done a little bit of iron here, but really, I think they liked just my mentality of, iron pouring, it's so much of a group effort. You can't do it by yourself.
No.
And it's also hands-on. You learn a lot by watching other people and what they're doing. And so I bring that into my teaching. Oftentimes, I'm not going to lecture to my students. If I'm talking to them or whatever, I'm actually doing a demo in front of them, or I prefer to actually have them do the demo. And I kind of talk them through, like if they're pouring plaster or whatever, so that they're getting that hands-on tactile experience and then learning through. Because I'm a visual learner in that way, and also a tactile learner. So for me, I need my hands in it to figure out like what's going to work and what's not going to work. And so that all came from iron casting. It really did, in that whole experience. And so, but I think I also got this job because it wasn't just about cast iron. I knew all these other materials too, and so I could do low tech materials as well. And I'd really been pushing kind of paper casting and things like that because it just was easier on my body, and my body was still kind of recouping it. Like I said, it took about 10 years before I could say, okay, I'm healed. And your discs do heal. You just have to strengthen everything and make sure that it doesn't move. Kind of like cancer, you want to make sure it doesn't move to other parts of your body. But we're often not taught how to pick things up, how to
Yeah.
move things, how to pick up a ladle, all of those things. And I definitely was not taught any of that. And so I think I'm a teacher in part by learning, from those before me that I didn't want to repeat. I wanted to actually do the opposite. And so the first thing I teach my students is how to sit in a chair and make sure your work is here and not like this, because of all the pressure it puts on your neck joints, on all your vertebrae. And I'll, often say like, it's too late for me, but it's not for you. And so take care of yourself as much as possible. 2008 happened with the economic downturn
Yeah.
and the recession. And so professors, this was pretty much a nomadic job, right? That you kind of moved around a lot until you ended up where you should be, in my mind. And so, like I said, I thought this would be a good first job, but it just, the opportunity wasn't there. And then we were able to build a new building, and I got to be part of that and design,
With the
every aspect.
school. Okay. I didn't know if you meant you and David or okay. So with
Oh,
the
no, no, no,
school
with
building.
UW. Yeah,
Okay.
with UW, we had the chance to build a whole new visual arts
What
complex.
year? What
This
year?
was I'd been on the and I got this job in 2003. Dave and I got married at Sloss in 2004. And so this building was built and we got into it in 2012. Yeah, so but imagine like 6 or 7 years before that, I was on the committees like planning and planning. And then once you get like, okay, we've got the money and you've got the building, you have like 2 months to plan what you want. But I think I've been thinking about this since USM. Like what I can have whatever I want. It's a dream, like $48 million building. And we had 2 million for equipment and furniture. And so when I found that out, my list got a lot longer.
As it should.
And it should, right? And I just fought for as much space as I could get, and they gave it to me. So now, be careful what you wish for. You just might get it, right? Because I think with all that space and whatnot, you have to take care of it all.
Yeah.
And and so at the time when I got this job, Dave and I weren't married. And so I couldn't really argue for a spousal hire. And so he got adjunct and worked at the museum. And then when we started kind of gearing up to move into this building, our shop tech decided to retire. And David was actually able to apply and was accepted for that job. So he's our shop tech. So I always joke around that I'm glad we like each other because we work together 24/7. Again, both a blessing and curse sometimes, right? But we work pretty well together. We do a lot of projects together, and so it just it works out. And so this place has been very good to us, and it's been amazing to be a part of the design. Like there's, I was like, I want outlets every 4 feet. I want airlines every 4 feet, like I want to make sure I want ventilation on everything. Cause it was the whole reason we got the building was we had no ventilation. Old school foundries, you like open one door, put a fan in it and open another door and hoped, that you got cross ventilation.
Yeah.
And so we didn't have to worry about any of that. So I was very hands-on in the design process and loved that part. I would totally get into consulting one day for buildings like this. It really is pretty phenomenal, but it's tricky at times too because it's all encompassing. It's you taking care of everything, making sure everything runs, ordering all the materials. It's a full-time gig that oftentimes takes time away from your studio. And so, but yet you have to be in your studio and produce and exhibit in order to keep these jobs, right? So you really are kind of a jack of all trades, in sometimes a really hard and impossible way. And I think, I was so used to being in the South and you just drove everywhere. I mean, we went to Tannen Hill Historical Park all the time to cast. You just traveled everywhere. Skip would drive his work everywhere. And so I saw a lot of that. You can't do that here because of the wind and the cold. There are whiteouts. There are sometimes warnings like no light trailers on the roads because they get blown over literally from the wind. And so that's pretty tricky here and has affected like materials that I work with as well as how many times we pour in a year.
Yeah.
Because in the spring it can get like 20 below and it's cold and windy and snowing, your molds don't work, right? And so it really gone from like pouring 5 or 6 times a year to pretty much fall and maybe some summer and maybe tail end of the spring, but it's usually our casting is in the fall. And so if you want to cast, you've got to go somewhere else in the spring. So that's changed like how I work. how I make things. And I'm very much a working artist. So my happy place is definitely in the studio. I love to teach. I think I would be very upset and sad if I couldn't continue to teach. But I could be in the studio by myself, all day, every day for I don't know how long. So I love that part. But in 2005, so I got here in 2003. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast, right?
Yeah.
And my dad and my sister still lived in New Orleans, and my mom was in Mobile, and I was here and didn't know where my family was when that hit. And so at that time, when things like that happen, I mean, it was all I could do to just not quit my job and leave and go down there and just try to help and do whatever I could to help, the whole community of the Gulf Coast, however I could. And you're seeing these horrible TV images of people looting and fighting for their lives and having to give up their pets as they're fleeing their homes for floods and all of that. And then you walk into these classrooms with these students that are here in Wyoming that are not connected to it, that have no idea, they're not paying attention to the news. And you're having to just have these stupid conversations with them about why they don't have their homework. And it makes, it also makes thinking about making art feel really stupid. This is why am I going to make art at this time when all of these people are suffering? And then our first house that David and I bought was a wildflower shop in the summer. So everything they didn't sell, they put in the yard. And so these amazing flowers that don't grow in the South were popping up at the time. And I was just kind of meditating as much as I could because I was paying our mortgage and needed to help support us and stay put. I couldn't go anywhere. And then I was driving to Fort Collins, which is in Colorado, and it's about 45 minutes. And most medical stuff, you end up going to Colorado if you live in Wyoming. And I was driving and I was listening to NPR, and they interviewed my sister at that exact moment that I was driving. And I found out that she was in Houston, and she had my 2-year-old niece at the time. That's how I figured out she was alive and she was okay. So
from
at that
NCR. That's
from
wild.
NPR. Isn't that crazy? Yeah, so serendipitous. So I figured that out, and then it was just rush of relief. Okay, they're safe, they're okay. And then I came back, and we have these giant dandelions here in Wyoming, and I'm sure in the West. They grow in every single county in Wyoming, and they're huge, Laura. They're this big, and they're gold. And I was watching them kind of disperse and just kind of put two and two together that these people were being dispersed, right? That they were being asked to leave their homes. And in New Orleans, your mama lives next to your auntie, and your auntie lives next to your cousin, and there's whole families that will take a whole city block, and those were wiped out from this, right? Completely gone. And I remember living there. I spent every summer, even in undergrad, I drive from Southern Miss and hang out there in the summers. And if a hurricane came, you just sat on your porch and drank through it. You didn't flee really. Now, when we were kids, my mother would pack us up and we were out of there because she lived through Hurricane Camille, and that really affected her. So I knew all these people didn't go anywhere, and then this happened. And so when I watched these seeds being dispersed, it just clicked, this is what I need to make art with and about, so that I can bring these things that are happening to these students, to these people of this part of the country that aren't affected in this way by hurricanes. But at the same time, the tsunami had happened. And then later you get, tornadoes in Missouri and all these different things that are constantly asking us to disperse and leave our homes as humans on this earth. So my work became about that. And then it felt like I had a purpose. I could maybe bring a silver lining, right, to someone that had been affected, they had to move, or maybe it was a kid that went through a divorce and they had to leave their house and move to a new state or a new city. I could offer some comfort in that. Oftentimes we're kind of thrown to the wind, and then we end up where we're supposed to be. So maybe I was supposed to be in Wyoming, right? Maybe I was supposed to land here and be transplanted here from the South for these reasons. And so I stayed in, and then I think back to, how much I worked in the garden with my mother and how I've always loved plants. And I think there's so many amazing like mental health properties in soil and just getting dirty and watching something grow. And so that's where seeds kind of entered my artwork from there, and it's been there ever since. And right when I think, okay, I've overdone this, I can't do anymore, something else happens. Another natural disaster, or Syria or whatever pops up, and then it's like, no, this will be kind of a forever thing. And so I've been pretty blessed to get a lot of granting opportunities through UW, and one of them was a couple years back. I got to go to the Kew Botanical Garden in London, and I got to actually work in their herbarium and study. They have over, it's something crazy, like 6 million plant specimens. They have over 200,000 botanical illustrations that you can literally like leaf through, that are from like the 1700s and from China and Japan and Bolivia and where. And I took thousands of pictures, and so I have probably enough kind of inspirational images to work from for the next 10, 20 years. But I got to actually like hold 18th century seed pods from Peru or wherever, and that was amazing. And so from there, I started working with a lot of art and science groups. And so now I'm doing things like sets for operas that have to do with science aspects of our world. I was part of, there were 8 of us from UW that were asked to come to an artist residency and do projects together that were art and science related. Again, it becomes like a problem to solve, and it feels like if we can actually come together and solve real world problems, whatever it's about, maybe sagebrush reclamation or whatever, then I'm so interested in that. And it gets me out of here, it gets me out of the building, so that I can go across campus and meet folks in engineering and biology and ecology and all those different areas. So that's kind of where I am basically today with my work. And I still cast things in iron. I use it for its material, not just because I can.
Mm-hmm.
So the fragile aspect of it, right? The strength behind it. Yeah, I think it has a duality of that strength and fragility that is really appealing to me and makes sense with my work. But I also cast still in paper and fiber and do all these other materials, and then I meld those materials all the time. So it's pretty rare for me to have just like a cast iron piece that I put on a pedestal. It's usually has several other components to it. I always said I don't know that I could ever be a stone carver or something like that, because if you give me one process to do all the time, I'm just bored. I like, and it's part of why I like casting. You have to go from the wax to the spruing to the shelling to the burnout and then the casting, and then you're not done, right? You got to clean it up and then put patina on it, and all of those things to me are very attractive and are part of why I love making molds. Love that part of it, right? I did build a furnace here. I'm not like, to hear how many furnaces Margie has built, I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
That was so like, oh, that's not me.
But that's her passion. You
It
have
is.
different
It is.
passions.
Yeah.
And we need all of the varieties in the community.
Yes. And the casting, but usually like the casting is definitely the passion, and what comes out of the furnace, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's going into the mold. And so I think that really came from, unfortunately, kind of the other side at USM, where it seemed more about the furnace and the process and less about like, what are you making with this? And so when I think about the damage I've done to my body and how hard I was on myself, I mean, we would go out, there was myself and Annadelle Blackledge, the 2 females in the department. We would go out at like 10 o'clock at night in front of the ceramics area where the furnace was set up. And we would spend all night there with a case of beer
Hmm.
and sledgehammers. And we
Yeah.
would go through tons of metal, just the two of us.
Yeah.
And how much damage I did to myself just trying to, keep up and do
Hmm.
what I thought we needed to do when there's so many smarter ways to do this stuff, that I think is definitely like advice. Like, you have one body and it needs
Yeah.
to be your temple and you need to take care of it.
Hmm.
And I think, looking back at Jimbo and so many other Jack
Yeah.
Ron, there's so many of us that have the same kind of ailments.
Hmm.
Not necessarily all because of iron, but it didn't help.
Yeah. It compounds with other life experiences, but
It
then the iron too.
Yeah. So I think as a an educator, I definitely try my best to not make that same mistake with my students, to
Hmm.
make sure that they know how to do things correctly, that they use all the hand trucks and dollies that we have around here.
Hmm.
The first thing I bought when I got my startup here was a jib crane. So
Nice. Yeah.
things up and move them around, and yeah, I just offer that to the students, knowing that I didn't have that same offering, so that they didn't end up in the same way, and being here a while, had an iron pour a couple years ago, ended up picking up too much weight. These students, sometimes they're ambitious and they want to make these giant molds, but then I'm the one moving them around,
Mm.
and I got into some trouble with some discs in my neck. But what happened this time was my disc was pushing into my spinal cord, and
Oh.
so I ended up having to have surgery, to fuse,
Hmm.
two discs together. And so it was actually at the last conference that was online for Birmingham,
Yeah.
right? Sloss. I was talking about this, and Julie Ward was like, you have to have your neck fused. I just got mine done, and like, I'm gonna call you, and we're gonna talk. And then I talked to Andrew Marsh, and
Yeah.
and all these different people. And because I was so scared, I was like, I remember Jimbo, and I was like, I'm not getting fused. I'm not getting fused. It will be the end of my career. I can't do it. And so many of these people are like, no, it's not the end
Yeah.
of your career. It's not. And you'll be in so much less pain.
Hmm.
And, I was having like 5 or 6 migraines a month.
Wow.
So it can't work like
Mm-mm.
that, especially when you're the like sole sculpture professor
Yeah.
in, program. So that's where I think this community is also just so amazing. It's just a giant family.
It is.
Oh, and it's so interconnected. I mean, what you're doing is so amazing, for so many reasons, but if for nothing else, like me listening to all these other interviews, it's like, oh, we have that connection. And
Yeah.
oh, I didn't realize that Aaron went to the college, or the
Hmm.
Institute of Chicago,
Yeah.
and so did Margie, and would we have been in school together? And just kind of thinking about all of these interconnections. It's pretty amazing. It's a small town, basically, the Iron community, right?
Kind of, yeah. And there's still so many people that I am excited to interview and learn more about, because it's like I know that you went to UGA for grad school, but I didn't know that you studied with Skip for undergrad. All of these things.
Yeah, yeah,
I know all these people, but now getting to learn the journey
yeah,
and also kind of the ups and downs. And so being able to listen to your story about your your injuries that you've been through and how you've persevered through all of that, it really, it helps me, especially kind of like right now, post pandemic, and it's kind of easy to be melancholy and it's easy to feel disconnected and alienated, and to realize like I'm not alone. There are
yeah.
people that we
Oh,
can reach
yeah.
out to. And
Yeah. Yeah, and
um
so when I got this job, Elizabeth Cronfield, or Biz, as everybody knows her,
yeah.
she and Matt Wicker were in Kearney, Nebraska. So they were just a couple of hours away.
Yeah.
And so we were able to see them. And then when I was at UGA, Rian Karan and her partner at the time, Mark Gilbo, had a show within our gallery in the old sculpture. Because I think you guys got a new building, right? There was a new building at UGA, and sculpture was moved.
Well, so I mean we can and I so that's it's funny because I have so many questions for you,
Okay.
but I kind of want to save it for the after show because
Okay.
it
Okay.
might be a little bit inside baseball-y, but I
Right.
want to know like exactly what studio was your studio
Yeah.
and did you so when I and I'll just say this so Jimbo, obviously but a lot of people probably also know that Jimbo is retired. But so when I was there, sculpture was still, I think it was like in the old
It's like a complex,
location.
right? Yeah. So there's
Yeah.
like it was lots of kind of metal buildings that were
Yeah. There
in
was
this
maybe
kind of
like
triangle.
it was maybe like three
Yeah.
different buildings and it was kind of near the downtown area.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so UGA did get a new building,
Okay.
but sculpture, ceramics, and metalsmithing were not included in the new building
Oh, that's lovely.
because of they were the dangerous arts.
Sure. Sure.
And
And the
so
smelly and the not so pretty and
yeah,
the
and all
dirty.
the people are always dirty.
So a couple of things. So when I went to Cortona, I mean, when you were a student of Jimbo's, you were at his house all the
Oh
time, right?
yeah.
You
Oh
just hung
yeah.
out. Like that's when a lot of the critiques happen, which is like, why can't you give me this critique when my pieces like were in the studio, but it just happened later, right? Which I loved.
Yeah.
But we hung out a lot with Gary Nofke,
Mhm, mhm.
and he came to Cortona with us, and so and there I can share a funny story with you later about that.
Okay, I'm gonna write it down so that
Yeah,
I
um,
um
but uh, but so that was, and they would just be on each other, like Jimbo would call him a trinket maker, and I mean they would just like, go back and forth, and so that was great fun. But I met Rian and Mark Gilbo in that gallery,
Mhm.
and then they were out here in Denver, right? So when David
Yes.
and I moved here, we connected with them and actually had a pour in Aspen because Rian is one of the most amazing. She's one of the most like mover and shaker. She's awe inspiring to me and exhausting. I just like hear about what she's doing and I'm just tired. But they were just having like just crazy pours over the place, and they had one in Aspen. We actually, Jimbo came out for it. It was when Eli, our son, he was like one or so, and Remy came out, and that's where we started the conversation for the Western Cast Iron Art Alliance. So that's where it started. And
Wow.
then it was like who to pull in. And at the time, we became more and more friends with David Lobdell
Hmm.
and with Toby Flores and
Yeah.
Kansas and connected. And then Brad Allen was up in Missoula,
Hmm.
Montana, and he was part of it. And so we thought, okay, every 2 years we're going to have these conferences because there's nothing really in the West.
Yeah.
There was some stuff going on. Hopi, Breton, and California was doing some stuff there, but there really wasn't a Western version of what most of us knew really was rocking in the South, right? And on
Yeah.
the East Coast. And so that started conversation started in like 2008, and the first conference was in Denver with Rian.
Okay.
And then we had Missoula, and then Hayes with Toby, and then we put the conference on here in
I
Laramie
know, and I
in
missed it.
2014, and it kicked my butt to be a
Uh,
host. It's so hard to be a host and take care of these
yeah.
conferences. So what's lovely about the Western is we all work together to make it happen. And so that's been just like awe-inspiring and so much fun, and like it's Iron Family, right?
Yes. Yeah. And that's why
Definitely.
we do well. And I mean, I feel like these get-togethers, like, yes, we're making art, but we're also making our we're lifting each other up. We're like when you're a part of that crew or a crew, it lifts up your self-esteem because people are counting on you. And then also you're proud of the work that you've put into it. And so I think that that's one of these things as I'm kind of going through these interviews is there's different like themes of
Yeah.
why we love it. And some of it is the materiality of it. Some of it's the process. Some of it is just the mental health of like how it helps you value yourself
Mhm.
and value others, be more empathetic to others, connect with others. And it's really just, I mean, that's kind of why I'm doing this, so that I can help more people, be connected or feel connected. And so then this way, at Sloss this next year, so that'll be 2023
Yeah, in
in this,
April, right?
yes.
Yeah.
And, so somebody that maybe has never met you, but sees this interview might be able to come up and introduce themselves and say, hey, that thing that you said about the dispersal of the seeds,
Yeah.
from the dandelions, I really related to that, because and
Yeah.
that's really,
Yeah.
one of the goals of this. So
Yeah, so spot on, Laura. It just really is, right? It reminds us of the connections we share versus what feels like, to me, being in a world right now that is almost being ripped apart in different ways, politics, what have you,
mhm.
religion. And you can't do this stuff by yourself in iron casting. You have to have help. And you also can't yell at each other and scream at each other and, put it like some of the things Margie was talking about in an interview, people putting her down and the things they were yelling to, it was just disgusting and horrible.
Yeah.
And I have luckily never had any of those interactions. I have been, I think, had moments of feeling marginalized or like not allowed to do things because of my gender at some time. So now, which is really interesting, most of my classes are filled with females, right? And so figuring out, even now with my body and having been fused now and doing great, doing amazing, but thinking about, okay, to pour bronze, okay, if I'm, a 5 foot student that's 100 pounds, I'm not gonna be able to pick this up.
Yeah.
So maybe we fill it up halfway and we just pour more times, or maybe I make a track for it, or they help me to plan a track for it so that they can help pour too. And so then they feel empowered versus marginalized,
Yeah.
right? So I feel like that's where I can have an impact in what I'm doing.
And I think that because even Kevin Vanek was talking about accessibility, so many people have been at Margie. That's one of her big things, is making it accessible to people, and how she did it herself by making a furnace that she can move and set up all by herself in the sections. And so I think that there's a really great movement towards making sure that there's inclusivity, and we're letting people feel empowered, like you're talking about. So that's a really exciting, I feel like, wave that we're
Yeah.
riding on right now. And I'm really excited to see at the next Sloss conference, or in the Western, how that plays out,
Yeah.
and helps our community grow.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's more of us that are conscientious about all of that too, and possibly in the past. So that's good.
It's good.
Strength in numbers.
It's yes, and it's a good movement to make, I think. So I wanted to actually ask you about a show. You just had a show set up.
I did. So I had a show at there's a museum called the Nicolason Museum in Casper, Wyoming, and I was supposed to show 2020, and because of COVID, right? I actually had work with Luke Sides down in Texas, and he had to close and kind of postpone that show, and that work was going to go into the show at the Nick, and so I just ended up having to cancel it. And then a year ago, they said, we've got a slot. Do you want to try this again? And I said, yes, absolutely. And it's about 2.5 hours north of here. It's a sweet, lovely space, lovely community, folks that run it. And oftentimes in these jobs for tenure, you're often encouraged not to show in the state that you live in, at least in my experience of trying to go through tenure, because you have to become something in your field, right? You have to get your work outside of regional. So there were times where I would get asked to do regional shows, and I have to say no, because I needed that work to go to more national or international opportunities. And so now that I'm full professor, I can tell them all to get bent and just show wherever I want. And
Yeah.
and it's a great space. So and it gave me something to really work towards. And I'm showing right now, it's up until the end of September. And there's work in there that is a little bit older. And then I made a couple of newer pieces. I've also learned not to drive myself into the ground when I'm getting ready for an exhibition. It's got to also fit in the truck or my car.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes you can't bring a trailer. And so to alleviate some of that pressure on myself to always want to do bigger and better and whatever, bigger isn't always better. Sometimes more is just more.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost kind of a retrospect in the space, and I'm honored to show there. So
I saw some photos online or on the Instagram, and it looks beautiful.
Thank
The
you.
museum looks like the space is really big, open and wide, and then you have that one piece of
it's a milkweed.
Milkweed.
Mm-hmm. It's a milkweed, yeah, which monarch butterflies primarily feed off of, and it's becoming extinct. And they're everywhere, and they're beautiful. They're amazing, and there's millions and millions of seeds in them, and they're really hard to grow. They actually have to go through a freeze before there's a coating on the seed that then the frost then takes off of, and then they propagate. And so I actually have small packages of seeds and have directions on my website that are linked to the seed packets, so people can take them away and then plant them in their gardens for the butterflies.
I actually just heard today from a research assistant that I work with that monarch butterflies are now I'm just like this is just something that I heard. So don't come for me in the comments or whatever. But those of you who are listening, I don't really know what I'm talking about, but it's just so funny that we're talking about this and the butterflies, because she said that now the monarch butterflies are considered an endangered species, and that the powers that be are encouraging people to try and grow milkweed to help the population of monarch butterflies. And it just, how ironic that I learned that today. And then we're talking about it today, and I knew that your piece was a milkweed, but
and it's tricky because milkweed can be considered invasive, and it can kind of take over. It's beautiful though. We just went on a river trip and saw a bunch of wild milkweed. It's really amazingly beautiful. But yes, so reading all of this, paying attention to all of this, I was like, I need to make it. And a non-traditional student who's not a friend of mine was taking my classes, and she saw a bunch of them like beginning of last year, and brought me a bunch of pods that were closed, and she had them in a paper bag. And I guess they dried out because everything dries out in Wyoming. It's so dry here. And when I looked in the bag, like literally days later, they had all popped open, and the seeds come out in like perfect geometry. It's pretty, like I always tell my students, it's hard to compete with Mother Nature. She really is a sculptor. And the fact that I'm doing what I'm doing is hard sometimes, because I'm like, man, it's just not as good as her work. But yeah, just watching those and watching them disperse, I'll be making seeds for a long time. I think. And it's also funny because David makes big things little, and I make little things big. So we keep saying we need to have a show that's called Big Things Little and Little Things Big, but we just haven't done it yet. So we'll see down the road.
There's time.
Exactly. But yeah, so I'm really honored to be able to show there, and I do a lot of public art stuff. So David and I are finishing a public art project for the engineering building on campus, which is a $90,000 commission.
Awesome.
And we actually were awarded that during COVID. So a lot of people were, I think, like you said, like feeling kind of alone and disconnected because of COVID. I loved it.
And that's okay. Like, I think that owning that.
I think I'm a homebody, and so for me, it meant staying home with my husband and my son, who are often like, "Are you coming home? Like, when are you coming home?" And so we were locked in our house. A friend of ours gave us a hot tub, so the boys got that running, and I had time to work on that commission, and ended up kind of changing my schedule so that I was teaching my 2-load, so that I only met with the classes once a week on Zoom. And and I would leave the students' materials outside my gate of my house, and they would come get them. And if I could tell they were going through a hard time, I'd like put cookies or, like try to
Yeah.
make them something or whatever. But I don't mind being by myself. I often kind of long for it. I think because I'm surrounded, and I love people. I love being around people, but
Yeah.
oftentimes I very rarely get time to myself. So for me, it gave me some time that I think I needed. I was tired. And it was scary, but at the same time, it was like, oh, it's quiet. Like I have time to write, draw, and think. And then we spent all summer. The university was pretty great, helping us learn how to teach online.
Hmm.
And so, I think I don't mind being on the computer. I laugh all the time. I was like, I thought, I didn't want to be a graphic designer because I didn't want to be on the computer all the time, but we are on the computer all the time.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I still am doing so much graphic design work just in what I do. I take care of our website for the Western, and yeah, I do logos all the time. And so it's funny how all those things kind of play in together and shape who you are and what you do. So, yeah.
So you are finishing up this commission for the school, but do you have anything else
Yeah.
that's hot on the horizon?
So we're finishing up our public art project for the engineering building, and that should get in place in the next month. And then we actually have a conference coming up for the Western Cast Iron Art Alliance. It's in Vermilion in October. It's the
I'm going to
first.
be there. I'm going
Oh,
to be
good! Yay!
there.
It's the first week of October. I'm hoping we've got you on a panel or something talking about all of
We'll
this.
see. We'll see. I
Yeah,
mean, I haven't talked to anybody yet. We can talk about it in the after show, or we can talk about it even like later because
yeah,
I'm definitely like Chris Myers. I told him that I would come out
yeah,
um to Vermilion, like either for the Little Poor on the Prairie or and then it turns out that the Western is going to be there this round. I want to say that was like in 20, it was at the last Sloss that was in person. So when was that? 2019. I was like, yeah,
yeah.
definitely I'll be out.
And then
And it
COVID.
just like, it wasn't
Yeah,
right timing. And
yeah.
then COVID, and it was just postponed and postponed. And even though he's been having the Little Pours on the Prairie, I haven't, just different life, life. And
Yeah.
so I'm like, come hell or high water, I will make it. Cause I
And it's been
always,
postponed
yeah,
several
yeah,
years.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I know he's itching to have it. We're all itching to see each other. But it's also tricky, right? Because COVID's still with us. So there's also
yeah,
that, like, a little bit of fear. But we're also in leathers and shields and
yeah, yeah.
ways to,
And, it just, I think yeah, it's
yeah.
getting better. And I had just gone to this past spring. I was at the Metal Museum. They had their fire conference, and it was small.
I want to go to. I want to go to. I've never been.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's it's really something special. And it's like, there's all these different places, there's Sloss Metal Arts, and then there's the Metal Museum and these different kind of hot spots, but they're all so different. Like
Yeah.
they're all in leagues of their own, and they're all fantastic. And it's just a completely different experience. Like they have everything you need.
Yeah.
But usually I feel like they keep their conferences kind of small.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things that I really like about the Western too, is that it's like it's not too small, but it's small enough that I can meet a good deal of new people and feel connected to them. Whereas Sloss can sometimes be so
Huge.
overwhelming that I don't tend to meet new people because I tend to just kind of stick with the friends, like the buddies that I have. But I've met more new people at Western conferences just I don't know. There's something about the atmosphere, and
Yeah.
I meet people at Sloss too, but I don't know. The Western is just got
For
like it's
fun.
just so it's very relaxed, and it's
Yeah.
very, yeah. So anyway, and that was one of the things about the one that you hosted in Laramie is I had a ride out there and I didn't take it. Like I
Ah!
had someone that was like, I'm going and I just want somebody. I don't know if you know Bob Rogers. So he's
Yeah.
around the
Yes.
Metal Museum.
He
Yeah.
did a workshop with us. He did
This,
it. His teacups.
Yes. Yeah. And like
Yeah.
he's one of my favorite people and just one of the probably people that the reason why I'm still casting iron. And so I'm going to tell you that's one of the things I'm going to tell you about in the after show. But
Okay.
yeah, he was like, I'm driving out to Laramie and I'm not wanting to do it alone. I'll stop by St. Louis and I'll pick you up.
Yeah.
And I said I couldn't because I couldn't afford it, or like I couldn't afford. I think I had like 3 part-time jobs. Like the thing is, I should have just gone.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like I try to not have too many regrets because life is too short. But that's like one thing I always kind of was like, I should have just made it work.
Yeah.
Because you can always figure out the money within reason.
You can, and we help you out and all that.
And
Not only that, but I raised in grant money, I raised $80,000 for that conference.
oh, well, no,
Because
it wasn't like the conference fees. It wasn't any of that. And he wouldn't have paid for the gas. It was like the money I would have lost taking the time off of
no,
work.
I got
And
you.
but the thing is, it's like you just work double the next week and I just at the
Yeah.
time I didn't have a full-time job. I had all these part-time jobs. So it's like I could have just taken a day off. Anyways, we're talking too much about me, but I always regretted not going out there. And so this one I'm like, and
Yeah.
everybody that listens to the podcast every week is probably like sick of hearing me. But I'm also trying to talk myself into a corner because now I'm like, I said, everybody knows.
Well, you
So
should go. Yeah, you should
yeah.
go for sure. And we'll figure whatever out once you're there. But it's a small. Vermilion reminds me a lot of Laramie. It's kind of a small town in South Dakota. This is all performance based. So Toby's planning a whole carnival, like Sloss Toss. All of that's going to be part of it. So and it's going to be a lot bigger and probably just crazier. So. Yeah, I think I'm hoping people come out, and so we're just kind of starting to advertise, and
Yeah.
there is now, if you are coming, there is a show exhibition call in cafe
Okay.
for the shows, and so do please enter, and it's always a lot of fun, and so it'll be great so it's the 5th through the 8th, I believe, of October,
October.
which is tricky, right? Because there's the international. I know a lot of people can't come because of that. I just couldn't afford to go to Berlin this year, and Kurt Deerhog even asked me to be on the planning committee and all that, and I don't know that I can take this on, and I think that really came from being the host of that 2014 conference. Like, I'm so glad I did it,
Yeah.
but it's so stressful, and you don't get to be in the fun as much when you're the host. You're on email, and you're fighting with the credit card companies, and you're on the phone, and you're a little worried that people are going to show up and they're going to do crazy things and get hurt, and you're having to pay for the paramedics and like all of this stuff. It's very stressful, and so I think from that I've learned like what I'm capable of, what I'm good at, and also what I'm willing to say no to. So I was really flattered that he asked me, and I said, ask me again, maybe in a different time, whatever, but there's no way. And just with COVID, you just never know. I mean, I went to Scotland in November and it was fine, but we got to figure out how to live in this world now, right?
Yeah.
COVID and figure all that stuff out. But because of our conference, also it was like, okay, I can't.
Yeah.
I am coming to Sloss though.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
I'm excited about April. Yeah, I don't know that I'm camping, but I'm coming.
Yeah, but I feel like camping isn't. I feel like eventually
I'm too old for that.
I was going to say eventually you graduate from camping. Do you know what I mean?
I'm almost 50. No, I'm not camping on the ground. So I'm good.
It's a thing where everybody goes through that phase, and then but
the other thing that we're doing is David and I'm applying to shows and whatnot, but David and I are finished, or we're not finishing. We're working on I like to make these connections across campus, and so I've made connections in the engineering department, and they have a makerspace over there, and so got in with them on a grant that came from the governor's office, and it's basically for mobile maker spaces for the K through 12 schools of Wyoming. So we are actually, David and I and a group of students are retrofitting the trailers and the buses to become maker spaces that can then be launched to whatever school wants them, and then the students can use the wood shop tools. There's 3D printers in there, there's laser cutters, there's sewing machines, all in the name of kind of entrepreneurship and giving kids skills in their hands. And part of that came from social and emotional learning, which is kind of a taboo, idea now, I think, just for its misunderstandings of people connecting it to critical race theory and that's a bad thing. So, but it's really come from COVID and the pandemic and helping kids work through what they went through with COVID. And so we're basically building the insides of these vehicles to hold all of the equipment. So that's pretty cool, and it gives us a little too, but it's pretty exciting. And so then it'll be dispatched all over Wyoming. And so we're working on that currently right now, which means not as much summer, but a little bit more money in our pocket, which is good.
Yeah, it's always good.
It's become kind of almost like an internship job for these students that are working with us, because they're learning how to work in the wood shop and how to put things together and craftsmanship and all of that kind of stuff. So that's pretty exciting to be a part of. Yeah. So other than that, David's building me a studio in my yard. That's pretty cool.
That is cool.
I think he's tired of me being at school so much. So
he's like, here, I'll make this just for you.
So I think he wants the comfort of, like, if he gets up in the middle of the night and I'm not there, like, he can just go outside and come find me, and I can bring my cats in, and I can work from home. It's hard as a sculpture professor. You're always visible, you're always on call, basically, no matter what. I was working on one of the operas, and I was here at 10:30 at night, I think, and a student was asking me for sandpaper, and it was just like, but then you feel guilty and you have to go get it for him and all that, but it just takes time. Like, there's nobody coming to the drawing professor saying, my charcoal broke, can you fix it? Right? But they're asking me to fix the welder and all that kind of stuff, and if I don't do it, I'm a horrible sculpture mama, and I feel guilty, and then I don't get what I need to get done. So that's pretty exciting that I'll have a nice space in our yard to work in
and be able to have some balance, some work, and then artwork.
What's that? What's balance? What does that mean? Yes, I think everybody needs balance, and I definitely have not had that. I think there are a lot of things I would do differently, for sure, in a teaching position.
So I feel like during this interview, you've already given so much advice, but I think we're going to try and go over to the after show and talk about some of this stuff that we just keep teasing about and like pushing off to the side. But in closing,
yes, I have advice. I have a list.
Okay. You have a list. Oh, okay. I love this.
So to reiterate, artwork, right? I think I often say, like, I can teach, I can try to teach some work ethic, like what expectations are of you, but I can't teach drive. But really, in what we do, it is all about work, right? And I think, I just love work. I just do. I just like to be busy. I like to have my hands in something. I like to have my body engaged. And so not to be afraid of work, right? To get out of our houses, to get off the television, to get off our phones and get, like, immersed in something, to remember that is part of art, right? The artwork. To jump in everything, right? I think Aaron said show up. And I think when we were in school, you didn't, hey, can I help with something or whatever? You just jumped in, and then often people would say, okay, do it like this, or go grab that shovel or whatever. Students don't, in my experience, at least in the past couple of years, students don't do that enough. They have to be asked, hey, I need you to show up here, or I need you to do this. And I think where you learn the most is even if you're, like, helping sweep, or I have to teach students how to sweep now.
Wow. Yeah.
So somehow we've lost that, like, showing up part of what we do. And I think you've got to show up, especially for iron pouring, right? Now I do find that once I still have alum that just show up, I can't stop them. They just come, which I love because then they're helping me with safety and to help kind of navigate the students. And they're just amazing. Because it can be daunting when you have whole new groups of students and you have to teach them all, and they're all iron virgins, right? They've never done it before, never seen it before, and then you're in charge to make sure they're not going to get hurt. But when that stuff kind of comes around, I think they start to think about like, oh, okay, I see what's going on, and okay, but it's like you got to show up for this, and this, and make sure you get work off, all of that. There's not that show up now, and I think that's really important. We've lost that, and we need to get that back somehow, and I'm not sure how, but I'm doing my best. My father-in-law has said before, you're older a lot longer than you're young.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Wow.
Right? So you need to take care of yourself when you're young.
Yeah.
Because hopefully you do. I mean, I'm 3 years off of 50, and I'm hoping that I'm even stronger, in my 50s than I have been in my 20s, 30s, 40s. But it means taking care of yourself, and taking care of yourself, like that balance, making yourself a priority and your body a priority, and not letting anyone take that away from you, right? So safety is important, and oftentimes at these iron pours, they're the worst. Like, sometimes I don't like all this performance stuff because it's scary, right? There's a lot of, I want to know what's in that mold before I'm going to say I'm going to pour it into it, help pour it, right?
Yeah.
And these ladles are heavy as hell sometimes, and we just do it. And a lot of times I think as females, we just do it because we want to, we want to be with everybody else and do what they're doing, but it's okay if you can't pick that up, and it's okay to say that's too heavy. I'll go slag, or I'll go do something else, right? There's always jobs to be done. But I think about that advice, and it's true. You are older a lot longer than you're young. So, but when you're young, you're invincible, right?
You think you are.
You think you are. Yes, but we're not. So, and you want to make art as long as possible. So you want to take care of yourself, right? I think that's all on my list. Those were my main ones that I have. Yeah.
And those are awesome points.
Yeah. I mean, I love cast iron. It got me into this gig. It's just a part of my soul. It has hurt me at times, and so I think if someone else can learn from my experiences and hopefully not make those same mistakes, then that's good, right? I've made a positive impact, and if I can make positive change, then I'm good. So yeah, that's my moral advice.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I mean, it's so awesome to hear your story and to hear like everything that you've been through, but how you're still going and you're spreading the word about, safety and perseverance. And it's just been, and so I'm excited to actually keep on talking to you over in the after show. So I had some things. So for everybody that's listening and watching, thank you so much for tuning in. And Ashely and I are going to go over to the after show, but what we're going to do is so I have, a story about a furnace fail, and you're going to tell me the funny story about Gary Nofke. And then I wanted to ask you some about the studio at UGA and have you been back since, when was the last time that you were there? Wow.
It's been a long time. So I think the last time we were there, Eli was like 1 or 2. He's 15 now.
Okay.
And no excuses, whatever. It's just life. Like you said, life happens.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of ways, tenure and this job has kicked my ass. It really has. And because you think, I'm going to be a professor and everything will be great, and I'll be like Jimbo and Skip, and we'll make art and run this stuff. But you don't. I think when you're in these positions, even as a grad student, you don't see the behind the scenes at all of what all is happening. And not only that, I think every job is different, and so much of this job nobody told me about,
Yeah.
and I had to learn the hard way through it. And like, it's really hard to be friends with people you work with in the
Mm.
department because you're
Hmm.
all voting on each other. And
Oh.
that sets up really crazy
Hmm.
dynamics and agendas and all that stuff. And I'm a pretty like, what you see is what you get kind of
Hmm.
person. So I'm never going to do a review on like if I'm asked to do an outside tenure review, I'm never going to review somebody unless I can give them a positive review. I'm never going to write somebody a rec letter unless it's going to be good. I'm not going
Hmm.
to backstab them or whatever. That is not the case in academia at all. And so you almost feel like your guard's up most of the time.
Wow.
You're disappointed in a lot, like, oh, I thought we were friends, but apparently not if you think this about like what I'm doing. And not only
Yeah.
that, the time spent away from your kid, your
Hmm.
husband, your own
Hmm.
work, and then it's like poo-pooed on, by this person or that person after the fact. It's devastating sometimes. And so you feel you have to have a really thick skin. And not that I don't, but I'm a human too.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And so yeah, it really has kind of thrown me for a loop. All of that. That yeah, we hadn't been back. The last time we actually stayed with Jimbo and Leanne, and Eli was, I think he was one. I think it was like around like Christmas, and we were visiting because David's family's in Augusta.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Yeah.
Augusta,
Hmm.
and then now his dad's in South Carolina. So yeah, we were there around Christmas, but we're coming close to there this Christmas.
Okay.
So we'll see. Yeah, I'm hoping to kind of get that way if we can.
Yeah. You got to. You got
Yeah,
to.
yeah.
And I'm way overdue. Way overdue. So we've got some stories for the after show. Do you have anything that you can think of that you want to tease, or do you just want to go with the
No,
Garys?
I just so thank you for having me to be a part of this.
Oh,
And I have just, you can't understand the thrill. I mean, we're in nowhere, Wyoming, right? Pretty much. And so we're so far away from all of you iron folk that this has just like reconnected me in particular to people like Andrew and Aaron. And, I met Aaron at Donnie Keene's
yeah.
Foundry a couple of years ago, and I knew of her in her work, which I just love her work.
Yeah.
It's amazingly beautiful, and she's one that I show students like, this is why you use cast iron, in your
Yes.
work, not just because you can, but because this is what it offers, the idea. And so I just think what you're doing is such a beautiful thing, and yeah, I'm
Thank
so
you.
proud of you.
Thank you. And maybe
Yeah.
I should like I've been thinking about saying this for a little while, but I don't know how to say, like there's certain things that as I'm editing these, because I kind of do the interview and
Mhm.
then afterwards when I'm editing it for, publishing, I really process it then. Like that's when I can really absorb the stories. I can write down the names, I can make more of the connections a little bit, have like a deeper realization of what I just kind of witnessed in a way that I can't in the moment. And if you're listening to this, like I should look at the camera. If you're listening to this and you've been triggered to think about somebody that you haven't contacted in a long time, just do us a favor. Ashley and I send them a text message, call them, leave a voicemail, drop them an email, send them a picture of your cat. I don't know, send them a picture of themselves, like a picture that you have of you and them at an iron pour.
Oh, wait, we
Let's
just
make a connection. Let's like reconnect
yeah.
because I think
You
that
literally just sent Remy a picture of himself with some curse word explicits from my husband. But,
that's
yeah, it just, yeah, I think tell somebody that you care about, you love them every day,
yeah.
thinking
Tell
about.
them, reach out to them. Let's make in these next years, let's make these next years be the years of reconnection, even and
And
make
go to as many things as you can. Go to as many conferences as you can. And if you feel like I can't afford the fee or whatever, there's always, like, we're having ours in October. If you feel like it's going to be really hard for you to get to South Dakota, contact me. And you can go right through the website and you get to our email. It's wciaa@hotmail. And let me know, like, you're interested. There's lots of volunteer. We need people for the registration desk. Like, there's all kinds of volunteer aspects that is as good as a registration fee for what we're doing. So I think, like, we're at that time where, I just remember being young and traveling as many places as I could. And that's where you meet all these people
Yeah.
that are lifelong friends,
Yeah.
right? And it's those connections and those memories and those experiences that we have on the pour floor a lot of the time at these conferences. So
Yeah.
go to as much as you can. Yeah.
Well, with that, folks, I think we're going to go over to the after show. But the last time I'll say it for the public episode, Ashely, thank you so much for being on today.
For having me.
All right, folks, we'll see you over at the after show. Okay, bye. Thank you so much for tuning in today. During this interview, I immensely enjoyed hearing Ashely's stories and learning about her background, as well as her current passion projects. Hearing her experiences in iron casting and how they changed the course of her life and career was deeply moving and inspirational to me. Ashely, thank you for sharing with us your personal experiences in iron casting and in life. Hearing how specific events have shaped your perspective and influenced your work was fascinating and motivational to me. Particularly when you mentioned the theme, we end up where we're supposed to be. For some reason, it really struck a chord inside my own soul. I've always looked up to you as a cool big sister in this iron casting family, and now those feelings have grown even stronger. I hope this episode does your story justice, and I can't wait to see you in April at Sloss. If you want more information about Ashely or are interested in seeing images of her artwork, visit her website, AshelyHopeCarlisle.com. And you can also follow her on Instagram at AHCARLISLE1. Please also visit the Western Cast Iron Art Alliance website, which is WCIAA.org, to learn more about the Western Conference, which will be held this coming October 5th through the 9th, 2022 in Vermillion, South Dakota. The theme of this upcoming conference is passion and practice. And for one last word of thanks to our top supporter, Sloss Metal Arts, as well as our other supporters on Patreon. The funds that they support me with are invaluable to help me continue producing these episodes. If you would like access to all the after shows for as little as $1 a month, go to our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/podcastiron. There you can choose what contribution level fits within your budget. But supporters at any level get access to the after show from each episode. And by now, you probably already know that it's just an extra 15 to 20 minutes with the show's guest where we talk a little more candidly and share at least one more story. Now, there's a running joke where more often than not, the after show is just as long as the public episode. So if you really enjoy the episodes and can't find audio content relating to cast iron art anywhere else, it might be worth the $12 a year for you to join Patreon. But if you don't have it in your budget to support the podcast Iron on Patreon, I understand. Instead, if you could just share this podcast with someone you think will be interested in listening or watching, I'll appreciate that just as much. Anything and everything helps, and for that I say thank you from the bottom of my heart. If you happen to be watching this show on YouTube, please subscribe to the Podcast Iron channel. This way you can set up notifications for when each episode goes live. But also, I'm working towards 100 subscribers because reaching that milestone will allow me to change the channel URL from a random arrangement of numbers and letters that I've just been assigned by YouTube to a more personal URL. And I would love to have the address for the YouTube channel be youtube.com/podcastiron. So for those of you who have already subscribed, thank you for helping me make this dream a reality. If you want to get in touch with me, you can email me at thepodcastiron@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening and watching. I'm sending you all my love always, and I can't wait to share the next episode with you. I'll talk to you soon, and have a great day.